North Korea's leader has ordered his frontline troops to be on a war footing after an exchange of fire with South Korea across their heavily fortified border. Kim Jong-un has declared a semi-state of war at an emergency meeting of his war cabinet, raising the stakes in the geopolitical arm wrestle between the two Koreas. The cause of the latest conflict were the loudspeakers on the South Korean side of the border. For more than a week, they've been blaring propaganda targeting the communist regime in the north. Fed up, Pyongyang decided to shell the speakers. The South retaliated with a barrage of artillery rounds. North Korea's state-run television released still photos of Kim Jong-un convening an emergency meeting and declaring that quasi-state of war. South Korea has indicated the propaganda broadcasts will continue, and the United Nations says it's taking the resumption of hostilities seriously.
But what we can say on the exchange of artillery fire that we saw reports of today is that we are closely following the developments with serious concern, and we will revert as the situation evolves.
This ritual of aggression between the two Koreas often results in strong language and the firing of ammunition, but this time the rhetoric seems more fierce and heavy artillery shells are now in use. The two are still technically at war, having agreed just to a truce in 1953, not a peace treaty. Andrei Lankov is considered one of the world's leading scholars on the two Koreas. He's the author of the book The Real North Korea, Life and Politics in the Failed Stalinist Utopia. Dr. Lankov is a Russian scholar who spent some of his academic life in North Korea, as well as 8 years teaching at the ANU in Canberra. He's now a professor at Kook Min University in Seoul. He's in Australia to give a series of lectures about life in North Korea at the University of Technology, Sydney, and he's with me now in the studio. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Tell us, how do you explain this latest provocative move, in particular from Seoul, with the blasting of this propaganda?
Well, it began a bit earlier, and you're sort of missing one stage. Because before that, a South Korean patrol in the DMZ obviously was stepped on a mine. And the South Korean side, the South Korean military insist that the mine was secretly and deliberately planted by the North Koreans. So they decided to switch on the loudspeakers, which were silent for roughly a decade. And now, North Koreans decided to shoot at the loudspeakers, and the South Koreans decided to shoot back. Boring. Life as usual. You know what does it remind me of? Of a long TV drama, a soap opera, episode 225. Mary again wants to leave Peter. Peter is upset. When the scenario writers are running out of ideas, they just recycle old situations. Do you probably remember, maybe not, people usually tend to forget unless they live in this place, that 2 years ago, state television not merely said that they are in a semi-state of war. North Korea essentially declared a war on the United States. Of course, the United States did not notice. And Kim Jong-un was shown on the state TV standing in front of a large map. It was written in big letters, so you could read it on TV screen. It was a map of a nuclear and missile attack against the United States. They said, officially, he was planning a nuclear attack against New York, LA, and by some reasons, Austin, Texas. Well, anyway, so it's life like usual style, business as usual.
I want to talk to you about life in North Korea at the moment. Before I do that, though, there's one question I really wanted to ask you. What is it that's blaring out of those speakers? What are they saying?
Basically nothing special. You are poor, we are rich. You are dictatorship, we are democracy. Mostly a correct matter-of-fact statement. But, well, just normal military propaganda. You just ask psychological operations specialists in any military, they will tell you this story. So nothing special, I would say. But right now, the North Koreans obviously want to have a bit of tension. Assuming that it was indeed their responsibility with mine, I'm inclined to believe it was, but I'm not 100% sure. And, well, because he needs a bit of cohesion. Sometimes it's done for diplomacy, sometimes for domestic politics. Now it seems to be domestic politics, because country is changing. Resources are moved away from the military to some extent. Generals are not happy. It's a good idea to remind them they are useful and to remind the common people that enemies are everywhere.
What can you tell us about the current state of the North Korean nuclear program? Because I understand there were some leaks recently.
Nobody knows for sure, but they have invested quite a lot of money and they are moving quite fast. Usually it's estimated they have about a dozen nuclear devices, but they don't have a reliable delivery system. They have some short and mid-range missiles, which are not particularly reliable. They don't have bombers, but they can get around. So they have some old-style devices like what the Americans and Russians used to do in the late 1940s, early 1950s.
I'm also curious to know how the economy of North Korea is travelling, given they have been under international sanctions for so long.
Funny thing is, once the international sanctions were introduced in 2006, it was exactly the time when the North Korean economy began to recover. Economic growth nobody knows, because from the 1960s there are only two kinds of statistics in North Korea, either secret or top secret. Nothing, everything. Number of cars, top secret. Number of, population of anything, everything is secret. But judging by the estimates, it seems that the annual growth rate is somewhere close to maybe 1.5 or 2%. Not great, but it's a growth. We have an idea that North Korea is a starving nation, and you might be surprised that in the last 3 years, actually 2 years, this year is a bit uncertain, they had very good harvests, and last year was probably the first year in, say, 30 years they produced enough food to feed their population, because quietly, without making any noises, the current government is switching towards system very similar with China of the late 1970s and early 1980s. Farmers are now given a share of the harvest. They used to be essentially slaves, worked for fixed rations. Now they are sharecroppers. They work for a share of the harvest and they work much better. Last year they had a drought. Many people predicted a massive starvation. Actually, they got best harvest ever. So economy is improving in this regard. Plus, you have a growing private economy, black market, which is not really black because the government deliberately turns blind eye and to some extent support private economy. If you want to run a big private business, you have to register as if it's a state property. But there are private mines in North Korea, and the economy is growing. Of course, there is a great inequality. People go to Pyongyang, they expect to see, an embodiment of a Stalinist state. Great people, great dress, starving people. No, they see rather capitalist city in many regards, with, expensive places where expensive brands are sold, a lot of cars, many more cars than ever, and some of them are expensive European cars like BMWs, Porsche, whichever. And it's a new rich. Many people say it's officials. Yes, it's very corrupt places. Officials have a lot of big slice from this private economy, but you have this new rich who are making money and doing quite well.
A recent report I saw found the number of North Koreans seeking refuge in South Korea has dropped from close to 3,000 refugees back between sort of 2008 and 2013 to now much less than half that, about 1,400.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that because the lifestyle has improved economically and socially?
One of the reasons, but not the major reason. The major reason, unlike his father, who just wanted to be left alone and die natural death, and as you remember, he succeeded. Unlike his father, late Generalissimo Kim Jong-il, Kim Jong-un takes political control seriously. He is making economy more permissive, more free, but he is increasing political pressure. And one of the things he took very seriously, he still takes very seriously, is the penetration of information about the outside world. The common North Koreans are not supposed to know how poor their country is, because the government bases its claims at basically its right to rule the country on the assumption that they are doing very well. And they are lagging much behind South Korea above all. The per capita income gap between North and South Korea is the world's largest gap between two countries with share and border. Common people are not supposed to know it. So the border with China used to be very porous, and now Kim Jong-un government got serious about border control. They persuaded Chinese to build border fences. There were no border fences. They dramatically increased the presence of the troops along the border with China, which used to be very easy to go to China. Many people traveled as illegal migrants to China to make money and they came back. Not the case anymore. And he's very smart. He wages propaganda against defection. Some people who defect then come back, they are disappointed, they are given opportunities to appear on the state TV, newspapers, to tell how bad life in South Korea is. And they don't say South Korea is poor.
I'm so sorry to cut you off, but we've run out of time. I could speak to you all evening. It's fascinating stuff. Thank you so much.